one of the things that you and I haven't had the chance to talk about is what's happened on the LBMA. Now, I haven't heard lately what the numbers are, but the amount of deliveries coming off the LBMA has been parabolic. That's where most of the silver coming into the United States has come from, there in Switzerland. Now, the sky's the limit for silver when you talk about the strain we're seeing. One of the things that you and I haven't had the chance to talk about is what's happened on the LBMA. Now, I haven't heard lately what the numbers are, but the amount of deliveries coming off the LBMA has been parabolic. That's where most of the silver coming into the United States has come from, there in Switzerland. Now, London is what's called a T+1 settlement market, where T is the trade day plus 1 is settlement, and the metal should be moving your way on day 3, in theory, right? Well, so much of the metal came in under the guise of tariffs at the beginning of the year, and then I think they caught on like, this isn't just tariffs. There's something much bigger going on here. And they, all of a sudden, the Bank of England says, sorry, we are a T+1 market, but we've had to go to T plus potentially 8 weeks because there's a shortage of manpower and trucks to move the stuff. So you're telling me the Bank of England doesn't have enough in the way of manpower or trucks to move people's silver or gold. Now imagine that you owned the Silver Slayer jewelry empire all around the world, and you sourced good delivery bars, both gold and silver, in London to fabricate jewelry. And you are on a schedule of fabrication, and you're expecting to get these bars in short order, and they say, listen, we're really sorry, Slayer, but we don't have enough trucks to move your shit, so you're looking at maybe 2 months delay to get your silver. Now that's a default, in my opinion. These are the kinds of things that we are seeing as a result of these increasing deliveries. And that's where the game starts to really change for the ability of these companies or these banks or these hedge funds to continue to naked short. Now, they have, I believe, got the message in gold. And you can see that by the huge amount, 15 million ounces of gold have been covered since the beginning of the year. The commercial banks, I think, understand that this is not a game to be naked shorted. Now, I don't know what's going on with silver because I see the naked shorting, or the shorting on COMEX, is still pretty high. There's a theory that has been bounced around by some of the guys on Substack that basically says banks like HSBC have been shorting the paper price of silver on COMEX, which is the price setting mechanism, and then accumulating physical all around the globe in non-price setting venues. So they drive the paper price down and then buy it all around the globe in venues that don't affect the price the way that it would if it was coming off of New York. Now, I think his name is Michael Lynch. It's very, very compelling argument. And the one thing that was interesting is he said this last month, or the last several weeks, when the price had shot up in silver, that they were absent from the COMEX, like the first time since the beginning of the year where they hadn't shorted the paper price on COMEX and the price went up. So you got all of these shenanigans still going on with silver, but that becomes exponentially more dangerous in an environment where the players stand for delivery. Yeah. So, that's something to keep in mind as well. We could be really at the foothills of a substantive move in silver into the end of the year. I mean, it's valid. Look, we're a country that's broke and insolvent. I think they talked about a $2 to $3 trillion goal for Doge. They got a few $100 billion, if that, and they have such pushback. And then you have Trump, who, his bill will increase the debt by $3 trillion or thereabouts. And not only that, he wants to remove the debt ceiling. That's the problem, is that we've it seems breached the point of resistance and fiscal responsibility, and maybe Elon realized that this is just ridiculous, that we are completely going contrary to anything that we had talked about, anything that we had tried to do. We have gone contrary to it. and threw up his hands in exasperation. That's really the problem, is that, we have a system based on trust, that being the United States and the reserve currency of the world. And we, even in our finest hour of trying to publicly rein in fiscal irresponsibility and employ some form of austerity, we realize that even in that environment we can't do it. So it's certainly good for the gold and silver market, but what does it speak to the value of the dollar going forward? A country that really could never balance its or clean up its balance sheet, normalize it. Treasury came in and repurchased 10 billion worth of long-term treasuries by creating more debt through short-term issuance. So they issue short-term treasuries, get the money, and then buy back the long-term. So they're just front-loading it because it's going out. I mean, it's there's no demand for the long-term debt. They have to come in and retire it, and that's proven by last 2 weeks ago, they came in and bought almost 50 billion in treasuries. The Fed did, scattered amongst 2, 10, and 30-year treasuries. Well, if there's such demand for our debt, why is the Fed coming in when they're supposed to be quantitatively tightening and doing the opposite and kind of being very quiet about it, so it doesn't appear that we're monetizing the debt again, but we are. This is a situation where the indebtedness of the country is really the biggest problem moving forward, because no one wants to continue to hold our treasury debt at these rates, which would mean rates would have to go higher, which means it slows down the economy, which means you see layoffs, which means you see problems in an overextended country that is over indebted and undercapitalized. And the distortions that were created through all the low interest rates over these years, the incentivizing of debt, the expansion of industries, all of this stuff, well, it's great in a zero interest rate environment, but it becomes very difficult to service that debt when rates are rising. And you have at the same time the largest amount of mortgage delinquencies, I don't know, since a very long time, the largest amount of credit card debt ever, over $1 trillion. The lowest, pretty damn well near the lowest amount of net savings. So you have a lot of indebtedness, low savings, rising interest rates, lack of trust. All of these things are happening at once. And maybe this is why the big money is front running it by standing. Seems like they see what's coming. The first thing you have to do is stop spending, and that's just it. And that's the problem. These people get elected by making promises, and that doesn't go over very well. But you can see that the complete and total lack of any responsibility or even common sense in the way that we spend. That we need to drastically shrink the size of government and let the free market take over. Free market enterprise should take over much of the stuff that the government does. It would be a far more efficient and less costly endeavor. We need to start to pay down the debt. We need to save. We need to exploit the natural resources in this country. We need to do a lot of things, but it's almost like we are getting very well near the point of no return. Now, I want to look at it at least from Trump's standpoint, because this is the problem, right? The problem is that it's called Triffin's dilemma. Well, Triffin's dilemma says that if you are the world reserve currency, you must always run trade deficits. You have to. You have no choice, because the need for dollars is far greater than you could ever provide just by trading. And when you look at the amount of dollar debt that's out there, there's a tremendous amount of dollar debt out there, Slayer. And, I don't know, the number's like $100 trillion. Countries that want to trade, they'll trade with one another in dollars. They have to repay that money in dollars. And so when you lend money, when money is being lent, it's lent into existence. When that money is lent into existence, if I lend you $1,000, it actually creates more demand for dollars in the future, because you need to pay me back in dollars, but you're going to need to pay me back more than I lent you. Let's say the interest is 10%. You'll need to pay me back $1,100. So there's demand into the future for more dollars. But let's say your company that you have somewhere down the road makes a product and it totally fails, and you go bankrupt, and you were a big client of a bank, and that bank goes bankrupt because of the depositors are, oh my God, and there's a run on the bank, and the bank goes upside down. And then it starts a daisy chain. Well, all of the people that they owe dollars to, and they can't get their money because that money just vanished because the bank went under. And then it's a daisy chain. This is the whole issue with the dollar situation, why there's always going to be more demand for dollars because of this massive amount of dollar debt. But what happens is you start to see a spiraling, if you will, of a deflationary spiral where one bank goes. So let me put it in an easier to understand context. Silicon Valley Bank failed, and Signature Bank. Now the Federal Reserve printed more money to bail them out. But if that happens around the world, that doesn't work. So we saw that happen with Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse was going out of business, and they had to be bought by the Swiss National Bank, who didn't have enough dollars to bail them out. So they had to go to the Fed and to their swap line and borrow dollars to bail out the bank. Well, what basically happens is that this continues until there's not enough dollars to facilitate, because as de-dollarization is continuing to happen and the demand for the dollar globally is waning, that money is disappearing, because when money is lent in dollars, it creates more. So as slowly as it starts to wane in favor of other currencies or commodities, you have a problem where you may have the inability to get enough dollars in a situation unless the Fed comes in and prints more. And if the Fed comes in and prints more, then we see more inflation, which lowers the value of the dollar to begin with, which raises interest rates. It gets to a point where these countries won't be able to borrow dollars any longer because the rates are too high and it's not profitable. And then the whole thing just starts to collapse. And you can see this starting to happen around the globe.